Sustainable Procurement Pledge YouTube channel. We will also be providing the slides shown from today's presentation to those who are SPP members, SPP ambassadors. So there to give you a bit of an incentive to join our organization, as it were, officially. So anyway, a really warm welcome to all of you to this webinar about accelerating sustainability in your IT sourcing. This is brought to you by the Sustainable Procurement Pledge and the Everest Group. And I would like to just begin by saying a few words about the Sustainable Procurement Pledge, or the SPP as we call ourselves. The SPP is a not-for-profit organization which was born in 2019, founded by two CPOs, two chief procurement officers from Bayer and Henkel during the climate strikes. And the mission was to bring sustainable procurement practices to the world, to do our part as procurement professionals in making the world a more sustainable place. And our purpose is that we are procurement, so we see sustainability in supply chains as our responsibility, and therefore we will build a sustainable future for people and our planet. And our vision is that all the sustainable supply chains across the world should have sustainable procurement practices embedded by 2030. So we estimate there's around 1 million procurement professionals out there, and those are the people we are trying to reach, as well as, of course, as academics and students as well. So anyone who has an interest, we're really interested in reaching them. And what we aim to do is to inspire, to help them to learn, and also provide a space for collaboration with the Sustainable Procurement Pledge. And we basically are organized into what we call chapters. So when you join the SPP, you become an ambassador, you take a pledge, which is to basically work towards driving sustainable procurement in supply chains. And you take a pledge, and we are organized in chapters which are based on country or topic or industry. So for example, if we take a topic, it could be something like scope 3 emissions, how to decarbonize, and they're
Sorry, Miguel, I put you on mute. I was actually trying to mute somebody else with background music.
That's okay. No worries, no worries. Yeah, I was just saying that we're organized into chapters. Chapters can be countrywide, so obviously this is being brought to you by the Denmark chapter. We also have topic chapters like Scope 3, which is concerned about obviously the decarbonization of supply chains, and we also have industry chapters as well. So today we're talking about accelerating sustainability in your IT sourcing initiatives, and the quick run on the agenda is I will now hand over to the Everest Group, and at around 9:45, we will open up the floor, as it were, for Q&A session. So today I'm really excited to have, maybe if you could just mute your microphones, those joining. I'm happy to see so many more have joined in the last couple of minutes. It's fantastic. So yeah, I'm really excited today to be able to introduce Banushi and Arpita, who are coming from Everest Group, which is a research firm with expertise on technology, business processes, and engineering, with a special focus on sustainability and procurement. So now I will hand over to Banushi from the Everest Group, who will take you through their presentation and the insights for procurement.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Miguel. Thanks a lot for giving that context. So like Miguel already pointed out, our topic is around accelerating sustainability, and we are specific to the IT sourcing journey today. So we'll be talking a lot about, the IT supply base, which sustainability-oriented suppliers you can work with, as well as, how you can do it. So we want to make it very actionable today and give you a lot of, things to do after this, right? Along with a lot of examples from what we've seen other best-in-class organizations do within the industry. But before all of that, we have a lot to share today. Arpita and I just want to give a quick introduction. So, Arpita, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Banshi. Hi, everyone. This is Arpita. I am a practice director with the firm. I lead the Charter for Sustainability, Technology, and Services. In my role, I am working very closely with global IT service providers to build their sustainability portfolio. So, we are playing a twofold role in the sustainability journeys of the IT service providers per se to help them enhance their own ESG targets and help them achieve their own ESG targets while also helping them build their sustainability offerings. So, as we will talk a lot more detail about this topic, but if you would understand, a lot of IT service providers are investing extensively in making their services more sustainable by incorporating an element of sustainability, by introducing sustainability KPIs in their already existing engagements, be it cloud migration or digital transformation engagements. So that's a little bit of introduction about me. Bhanushi, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Arpita. So I am Bhanushi, and Arpita, while she leads the charter on the sustainability side, I lead our charter on the sourcing and vendor management side. So, clients that I cater to are all across, the CPO segment, IT procurement, heads of indirect sourcing, as well as on the supplier management side. So we work a lot with VMOs as well on performance, risk, and innovation management. And the work that we do is focused on helping organizations accelerate their sourcing journeys. So whether it is by bringing their market intelligence, and we're focused on services, as Miguel rightly pointed out, right? So technology, business processes, engineering services, all of the intel you need around those outsourcing angles, as well as getting you the how-to of sourcing, which is what we're going to cover today as well, as to what is other best in class, in what are other organizations doing in the industry, and what is it that you can do, which is contextualized to do to accelerate your journeys in the life cycle. So without further ado, I'll hand it back to Arpita, and she will kick us off, and we'll be covering, we'll be starting a little bit around the IT services supply base. So we will be talking about how sustainability has been embedded into the IT services industry, following which we will be talking about the role of IT procurement in driving sustainability. And then we'll provide a roadmap to you on how to work with your suppliers when it comes to driving sustainability aspects. So, Arpita, over to you now.
Thanks, Bhanushi. So if we can move to the next slide. So before we get into the action items for procurement teams, how they can drive sustainability, we wanted to give you a little bit of lay of the land on what's happening on the supplier ecosystem base. So if you look at the IT service providers, I think I briefly highlighted this before. They have a dual integral role to play when it comes to driving sustainability for their clients. The first key role that they're playing is about boasting their own ambitious net zero targets, and this has become quite important in the era we are living in, because as we look at the regulatory landscape, be it CSRD across Europe or even the laws coming up in US, it is increasingly IT service providers are coming under the purview of these regulations as they contribute to scope 3 emissions of their clients. And that makes it important for IT service providers to have very ambitious net zero targets, to be a top provider of priority, top sustainable providers that these clients can collaborate with when it comes to IT services engagements. The other element that they are becoming important is they are incorporating sustainability as an element across their IT services engagements. So, be it a cloud migration engagement or a digital transformation engagement or an IT architecture revamping engagement, sustainability is increasingly becoming an important KPI across these engagements that enterprises are increasingly asking for. So we have a few examples. For example, NTT Data has committed to net zero and 100% renewable energy data centers by 2030. Capgemini is promising to make all data centers in India powered by renewable energy. Another key element, if you look at some of these leading service providers, they're also launching sustainability focused offerings. So, for example, if you look at TCS, they have launched a clever energy solution which helps their clients in better energy monitoring. So they're rebranding some of their offerings, calling this as sustainability offerings that will directly contribute to decreasing the carbon footprint of their clients. The other I just want to highlight, when we're using the sustainability as a term loosely, but sustainability for Everest Group comprises of all three elements, be it environment, social, as well as governance. So we look at sustainability from all the three lenses and not just focus on the carbon footprint, but also involves the social element and the governance element of sustainability. Moving on to the next slide, if we look at some of the examples of how enterprises are collaborating with service providers to bring down their carbon footprint or accelerate their sustainability journeys, we have highlighted a few case studies where enterprises have proactively adopted green cloud migration or sustainable cloud migration initiatives, which has considerably contributed to bringing down their carbon footprint by selecting a infrastructure option that helps you optimize your storage as well as calculation emissions by moving to sustainable clouds. If we, Dhanush, if we can move to the next slide, we have highlighted how the ecosystem itself is evolving for sustainability. So when it comes to procurement teams, I've talked a lot about how sustainability is being incorporated as an element across IT services engagements. But there are also niche offerings across by technology service providers as well as IT service providers that are targeted for procurement teams to make the procurement process itself more sustainable. For example, if we look at the first category, which is around ESG specialists, these are the rating agencies that are providing the right data, credible information to their clients to help them identify the suppliers with higher ESG rating. They can also help their clients validate the certifications and the credibility assessments that are provided by their clients to have a better, more credible information around the ESG matrix of their suppliers to shortlist and prioritize suppliers that are living up to their word. There are also technology providers playing an active role, such as SAP, Oracle, that are bringing in the IT technology and platforms that can help the enterprises procurement teams to capture the data, involves supplier actively manage supplier data, incorporate supplier data transparency across your supply chain or procurement value chain. And then, of course, there are IT service providers who are actively collaborating with their clients to help their suppliers become more sustainable. What they're helping the service providers, their clients do, is to transform their supply chain or procurement value chain to help them build that collaboration, that connection with the suppliers to make the process itself more sustainable. In fact, bring in more nascent suppliers who are not yet aware of ESG, maturity of ESG as a domain, educate them, collaborate with them, work with them closely to make them more sustainable, or at least get them started on their sustainability journeys. And then finally, if we just try to give you a picture of how fast this ecosystem is evolving with the tech providers or the data and reporting providers and the sustainability service providers. Ultimately, most of their solutions are helping enterprises assess environmental risk associated with their supplier base, facilitate collaboration with the suppliers to develop mitigation plans, and also co-innovate to address recurring sustainability challenges. With that, I think I'll hand it over to Bhanushi to take us to talk about how procurement teams can play an active role in driving sustainability by collaborating with the suppliers.
Yeah, thanks, Arpita. And I hope this was helpful to you. And do let us know if you have any questions. I know that Miguel wrote this in the chat, but do feel to drop in your questions as and when they go, right? We'll try to address them towards the end, as well as maybe, through the session as well. So now coming to the role of IT procurement, right? You have all this information, you have all this market intelligence on what is there in the lay of the land for IT services, but what do you now do with it? Firstly, just want to set the base that procurement is actually very well positioned to respond to the shift towards sustainability because of the fact that you can collaborate well between all the internal arms. The function itself is structured that you have a very collaborative ecosystem, right? You work with third parties, you act as a bridge between the business and third parties, and you can also incorporate sustainability into it by collaborating with those internal departments, right? So a lot of times we've seen that there is a governance model within procurement departments that has been created. Arpita pointed out that we, consider sustainability as the entire ESG landscape as well. So let's say you have some sustainability champions within the procurement team, or you have diversity related roles that are created who are actually just managing whether the supply base is diverse enough or not, right? So all of these, roles and responsibilities are being allocated within procurement so that there is an incorporation of sustainability between the business and the third parties, right? One of the things that also needs to be done by procurement is making sure that you're measuring this well, right? So you're doing a lot of work around sustainability and making sure that you're monitoring it with your supply base, but you also need to make sure that the impact of that is measured and you're actually putting it in your procurement scorecards. So going beyond cost savings within the procurement scorecards and incorporating all these elements is also being a key factor when it comes to having sustainability in the IT procurement journey. Right? These are actually the starting elements that we get to whenever it comes to getting maturity in that journey. So with that, I think what I'll do now is give you a very actionable kind of content related slide, which is talking about all of the environmental, social, and governance aspects. And it is giving you touch points across the S2P journey as to where you can incorporate sustainability related factors within it, right? So I won't talk through all of this. I did want to share it because I know that you'll get this presentation. You'll have this as reading material for later also. But if we just consider some of the interesting, examples over here or the action items over here that you can incorporate, at an easy, I would say, these are sort of low hanging fruits that you can incorporate initially as well when you're early on in your sustainability journeys, right? So let's start with the environmental factors, right? When it comes to procurement strategy, firstly, you want to see, so Arpita mentioned, all the net zero targets that providers have. Now, you as a company have to see what is important for you as a to get within your supply base ecosystem. Is it that you want to get more providers that have, stringent net zero targets? Do you want to measure? Do you want them to measure and report their scope 3 emissions, or do you want them to have certain certifications? Such as they have green buildings, or they have the LEED certification, or do you want them to, also have some, let's say, social related certifications, such as are these diverse providers, are their owners diverse, or are they hiring workforce from in economically disadvantaged regions, and so on and so forth, right? So all of these are factors that you need to really align with when it comes to your business as well as your overall organizational strategy. And a lot of times this depends on the industry as well. So let's say if there's a company which is very, let's say it's a mining company or an oil and gas company. Typically, we've seen that environmental factors are extremely important for these type of companies, right? Because they're already creating a high level of impact on the environment, right? And when it comes to social elements, we've seen that the services industries are more keen on incorporating these factors within their, supply base ecosystem as well. So what you do with your supply base, what you do within procurement is actually very well linked to what is happening in your organization as a whole. And you need to make sure that you're actually filling that bridge when you're sort of charting out your sustainability journey. Okay. So that's the first sort of base level point that we wanted to talk about today. Then, of course, there are certain, activities that we do within procurement, which are also very important, but they sort of stem down from the strategy that you've created in the beginning, right? So if you've built a roadmap for carbon management, let's say, on net zero targets, you want to make sure that it's coming down to your spend analytics and your category management and all of these other processes that are here, right? So for instance, for spend analytics, you want to start monitoring your high spend and frequent purchase categories who are contributing to these high scope 3 emissions, right? Similarly, within supplier relationship management, which is post-contracting, you want to make sure that you're educating these providers to track and report the emissions that they're creating. And you're getting this information within your scorecards as well. So all of these are aspects that you flow down within your S2 C value tree. And then when it comes to P2P, we've also seen instances of, organizations that are actually analyzing their invoices to calculate and report the entire carbon footprint that their supply base is creating, so that their overall GHG can be measured and then reported, right? So, just want to give so all of these are good examples that we are getting from organizations who are very advanced in their maturity journeys when it comes to sustainability in that IT sourcing process. But there are little things that you can adopt from the beginning itself. And again, just link it back to your organizational priority. When it comes to social and governance related factors, I think what I would again say is just look at the entire supply base and see what is actually important for you. So for instance, ownership diversity, when it comes to suppliers, it may not be important for a company that is actually looking at the workforce, right? So there's a difference between who your owner is, whether your owner is diverse or not, and whether your workforce, the supplier's workforce, is also diverse or not. So you want to make sure that you're actually tracking the right thing in that place. Like you want to make sure that the supplier is actually hiring workforce or training talent that is coming from diverse regions or economically disadvantaged regions. But at an overall level, if the ownership is only diverse and the provider is not doing anything else, then it may not make a difference to you as well as an organization, right? Then when it comes to the governance related aspects, it links back to all of these points, right? But within governance, risk management also becomes very important, because you want to make sure that all of the risk ratings and the compliance and the reports that the supplier is giving you, that are sort of coming back to your sustainability tracking or the procurement tracking that you have. All right. I see that a few questions have come in. So I'll try to take one question. How can an organization influence providers' hiring or talent strategy? Okay. All right. I think this is a good question. Now, we've typically seen this example within contingent workforce, right? So what happens is that basically you're getting a lot of contractors and you're getting a lot of workforce for your various IT categories. And within that, especially you're working with your staffing providers or your MSPs, right? So what you can do is, for a start, you can just get them to provide the diversity of the contractors that they're getting, right? So you want them to give you data on, let's say, within the workforce that they're providing, which regions are they coming from? How much of them are diverse in terms of women or, economically disadvantaged groups. Or on the other hand, you can also just have your entire supply base data, and you can work with providers. Let's say you have a percentage of spend that you classify as diverse, right? And within that, you work with providers that are actually diverse in nature as well as in the way they work, and they hire talent that is impact sourced, right? So Arpita has actually done a lot of work on impact sourcing in the past, and I'll just hand it over to her for a minute to talk about it. But impact sourcing is a practice in which you can actually hire from economically disadvantaged regions, and the workforce that you're hiring is also from those regions. Sorry. Arpita, can you talk for a second about impact sourcing and the work we've done around it?
Sure, Banshee. And before that, I'll just like to highlight. So what we are increasingly observing in IT services contractual engagements is enterprises are increasingly adding the element of sustainability. So for example, incorporating a separate section in the RFPs where they request for ESG specific data. So this element of how can you influence a supplier's hiring process, you can start directly from the sourcing process itself. there is a tendency for for enterprises to collaborate with those suppliers who are committing to their who have a more mature ESG targets. So that's where it's putting a pressure on the suppliers to, get ahead of their ESG journeys, because otherwise they're losing out to collaborating with new clients. When it comes to your existing suppliers, the better approach is to start by educating them. And I think Bhanushi will cover this in a lot more detail on post contractual, like how you can track the progress once you have a contract with a supplier, but how can you make sure that the contract incorporates that element, that even during the engagement there can be changes within the contract that gives you the power to influence some of these ESG decisions of your suppliers. And talking about impact sourcing, a lot of service providers, yes, we highlighted a few net zero targets, but I would just like to highlight a lot of global IT service providers are adopting impact sourcing initiatives. Impact sourcing is intentionally hiring from marginalized communities globally to have a more diverse workforce within your ecosystem. So we have a team covering impact sourcing in a lot more detail. What we can do to help the group is we'll incorporate a slide to get in a little more depth on impact sourcing. So when you get this deck, you will also get a little more understanding on how the coverage of impact sourcing and how it's impacting the sustainability ecosystem overall. Over to you, Banushi.
Yeah, thanks, Arpita. All right, so I think with that, I'll move on to the next slide, right? So these are some specific cases that we've seen and some interesting learnings that we've seen from the pioneers of sustainability within the IT sourcing journey, right? So what we have seen, and I'll talk about the first half of the slide first, right? Firstly, peers are tracking sustainability metrics. So when it comes to environmental metrics, you can consider aspects such as decarbonization, the energy profile of the supplier, efficiencies, waste management, or the water conservation initiatives. All of these aspects are being tracked, right? They're going back into the regular scorecards that you have for these suppliers, and you're also doing it on a periodic basis. So on an semi-annual or annual level, you're again and again asking the supplier to self-report this information to you so that you at least have this in place as a start, right? Then the second thing they're doing is tracking a lot of governance metrics, right? Which is around the board level governance they have around sustainability. Are they, do they have a separate department that is managing these aspects? How collaborative is that department? What are the policies that they have in place? And so on and so forth. And of course, governance also covers all of these, data privacy, information security aspects that when you as procurement would be very familiar with these, right? They're already there in our contract, suppliers code of conduct. These are all tracked very regularly in the supplier selection phase and within the RFP process. So this is something that also forms a part of the overall ESG value chain as we look at it, right? So first thing is, of course, tracking, right? Then the second thing is that they look at it from a category-wise perspective when it comes to IT. What peers are doing is that they're emphasizing on environmental considerations when they evaluate categories that are more, I would say, materials or device centric. Let's say the end user device suppliers, the data center hardware, as well as the cloud service providers, right? Whereas governance is the top consideration when you think about software or services related suppliers. So we work a lot with outsourced services providers, and we can also, put a claim to that yes, within outsourced services, when it comes to which criterias are most important, governance would of course, have the top priority, whereas environmental factors are not so important in those cases, right? They would look at things like, again, green buildings or carbon emissions and so on, but they won't prioritize it when it comes to the evaluation criteria in the sustainability scorecards. Now, talking about an important point, right? Is this a make or break when it comes to supplier selection? And I would actually love to hear your thoughts as well. That has your organization been considering this as a very important criteria or not when you are going out for an RFP, you're doing a sourcing initiative? Are you actually, using sustainability as a big lever in terms of, okay, we will work with the supplier versus we will not work with the supplier. So do drop in your comments if you have any within the chat. But from our experience, what we have heard is that this is not a sort of break or make kind of criteria as of now, but organizations have started using it as let's say there are two suppliers that are at a similar rank, then ESG would help that one supplier take priority over the other, right? In most cases, that is the that is what is happening. But in some cases, what is also happening when it comes to, let's say if you have a criteria of you have to have 5% of your overall spend that needs to be certified diverse. And this happens a lot in US, right? Because they have these procurement mandates or these procurement criteria that they have to fulfill when it comes to ESG. So if you have this sort of criteria, then of course you would just go to the market and only search for these suppliers that are diverse, right? And then the sourcing process will be happening amongst the diverse suppliers, and the capability comparison must be happening within the diverse suppliers, right? So that is the difference that we see in the market, that make or break, no, but definitely something that is considered when it comes to making a final selection decision when there are two providers or three providers with similar ranking levels. So here are some case examples, right? We have worked with a UK-based insurance company. They have a huge sustainability mandate. And this is a huge company, by the way, in terms of insurance as well. I mean, billions of dollars in spend just in IT as well. And what they have done to sort of advance the sustainability mandate is firstly create a separate unit within procurement, dedicated resources, who are just focused on making sure that ESG is being tracked within the supply base, right? So that is one major thing, that you have separate roles. Now, of course, all organizations don't have this sort of, separate resources being managed to be able to do this. So what happens in those cases is, of course, a lot different, but this is sort of the best in class organization that we've seen. Now, what this particular unit was doing is that they're fostering a lot of collaboration cross-functionally. So they have a lot of, let's say, governance mechanisms in place, a lot of ideation being done as to, okay, what else can we include within sustainability? Then they're making sure that even suppliers are being firstly tracked and then also being held accountable for the declarations that they make on their ESG criteria, right? So it's not that the information is just coming into the system and then you're just forgetting about it, but it's also that somebody is tracking it and making sure that suppliers are giving the correct information over time. All right. And then another example from APAC, right, which is again interesting because APAC is a little, I would say, it's still a little lower in their sustainability maturity in terms of the organizations. But this is a very huge Philippines-based energy company. And what they did was that they transformed their IT hardware sourcing, firstly by gaining visibility into the tier 2 supplier ecosystem as well, right? So what they did was they got all this data on where the suppliers of suppliers were sourcing from, where are the equipment coming from, and then they implemented the tracking and reporting mechanisms to make sure that they're sourcing from the right place. So just wanted to share these two examples with you for, that you would know what is happening in the industry, right? It's not just all amazing work that's happening out there that we don't know about, or maybe it happens in other organizations. It's actually out there, right? People actually do care about it. And this is what they do with respect to it. All right. Now we come to the category aspect, right? So what we have over here on this slide is that we've tried to give you a view of which categories have high maturity when it comes to incorporating sustainability within their IT ecosystem, so that you can also prioritize and deprioritize based on which categories should gain importance versus which should not. So in our experience, we've seen that software, hardware, and data center, these usually have high adoption of ESG as well as high maturity of ESG within organizations. telecom, cloud, and consulting are in the middle, and managed services is at the lowest angle, right? So outsourced services, managed services, while these companies are providing a lot of labor and resources, it is not very common to see that uh, organizations are measuring sustainability within these. And I think this is the last sort of angle that I wanted to cover. And I covered it in a lot of different ways. I kept talking about it, that you should measure it, you should take credit for what you're doing and all of those things. But this is how you take credit, right? So you have a procurement scorecard that you make, which has cost savings, which has cost avoidance. It has so many other factors with respect to the innovation that you're driving with your suppliers, or it can also have factors around, the customer satisfaction levels that you have as a procurement team. But we can also include sustainability focused procurement metrics, right? And again, this would link back to the procurement strategy that you set in place in the beginning. So what you want to put into the scorecard really should be aligned to your overall business agenda. If it's carbon emissions, then you want to make sure that your supply base and the carbon emissions that the supply base is generating, that is also being put into the scorecard. And here are just some examples and the frequency of measurement that you should be having for these aspects. So if it is carbon emissions again, then you can measure, let's say, the scope-wide CO2 emissions. You can measure the overall roadmap duration. I think that Arpita pointed out for carbon neutrality, the net zero targets. And again, like I said, you need to measure it at a very low frequency. And this is all self-reported, data from suppliers. So it's not that there is a lot of, I would say, manual effort that needs to go into it to, go into, let's say, some outside database that you have to collaborate with the DNB to get this information. You can, of course, Sustainalytics, EcoVadis, all of these are sustainability rating providers. But then depending on where you are in your journey, you can start by taking these little steps depending on your organizational priority. With that, I think back to you, Arpita.
Sure. Thanks, Manushi. So with that, we'll just like to summarize before we get into the questions. So Manushi, if you can move to the next slide. Yeah. So currently the need of the hour for organizations is to go back to the whiteboard and look at your supplier ecosystem currently, with the existing suppliers as well as the new suppliers that you're planning to collaborate with. We have built a supplier impact assessment matrix, which can help you categorize these suppliers. This is a 2x2 matrix. On the x-axis, we have ESG risk, which is a measure of how prone are these suppliers to ESG specific risk, which is environmental social governance risk. And on the y-axis, we have the suppliers criticality to your businesses, which is a combination of some subsegments such as what is your current supplier spend, what's your relationship, is it a strategic relationship, what kind of alignment you have with suppliers, and what revenue impact that the supplier is currently contributing towards. And that makes the quadrant 1 as the most critical category of suppliers that requires immediate attention, because these are the suppliers that are prone to high ESG risk because of their lack of ESG maturity, because of the understanding of the ecosystem, or just lack of intention to have more aspirational ESG, ambitious ESG targets. And they are very strategic to your current business. I think this was also highlighted in one of the questions earlier when it comes to IT service providers. These engagements are quite strategic. So how do you deal with such suppliers? So I think the key message that we have for you is actively engage with these suppliers to mitigate ESG risk. And you can use some of the technology platforms that we highlighted before. So what enterprises are doing, especially for suppliers that are not very mature in terms of their ESG maturity, they are extending their existing ESG platforms. And when I say ESG platforms, these are end-to-end data tracking platforms. So you could use a platform, or you could do it in-house through your own dedicated ESG units within your procurement teams, where you collaborate extensively with these suppliers, try to educate them on the relevance, importance of sustainability in the long run. Try to talk about what are the voluntary regulations that you're intending to talk about within your ecosystem, and then actively push them towards driving their own ESG journeys. And look, in the long run, we do want to highlight that the better approach would be to look for alternate suppliers to reduce dependence on less ESG mature suppliers before regulations such as the CSRD come in full force, especially when it comes to Europe. Then the other quadrant that is important is quadrant 4. So these are the suppliers who have a these are the suppliers that are critically very important to your businesses, and that they have low ESG risk, or they could be more mature when it comes to tracking their ESG matrix and targets. And this is the golden quadrant that we have for your supply. So whenever you are going for a new supplier, or trying to identify which of the suppliers you will want to increase your collaboration with, when you have multiple options, the suppliers falling under this category is the supplier ecosystem you need to go after, you need to look after, you need to collaborate, strengthen your relationship with. The other two quadrants are about potential partners. These are the suppliers with low ESG risk but low business impact. This is the ecosystem where you might want to increase collaboration considering the risk is low. And then finally, quadrant 2, which is more around if the impact is not that high, if you have alternate suppliers, if it is easy to switch to another supplier, better to do it in the short term rather than waiting for the long term. If we move to the next slide, Bhanushi, so the need of the hour again is to move away from traditional procurement processes to forward-looking sustainable procurement processes. And I would like to address one more question here. I think I read a question around, yes, there is a gap in terms of intention itself. So the means are available. Yes, there are some guidelines available. There are questions you can incorporate in the RFPs. There are tools, there are technologies, platforms you can use to actively track supplier data. But sometimes that intention itself is missing from organizations to get ahead, to use these tools to their maximum advantage. So what we are seeing, especially from large organizations in Europe, is they are increasingly linking the executive pays to your ESG targets. So I think Bhanushi highlighted about your procurement strategy. Increasingly, the key stakeholders, the large organizations, are linking the CTC components, the compensation components, with the ESG targets that you set for your procurement teams. And this is putting a lot of pressure from the top down on the procurement teams to take care of your ESG targets or net zero targets overall. And as Bhanushi talked about, there's increasingly a need to have dedicated ESG units, ESG specialized experts or talent within your procurement teams. Their core responsibility is just to ensure that they bring in the right innovations, collaborations, the right domain expertise, so that the procurement teams can stay ahead of the ESG risk that a supplier might bring in. So yes, it is about costs for procurement teams, it is about risk for procurement teams, but ESG should increasingly get a place on the table with these other important metrics. There's a need of the hour to prioritize suppliers, especially when you're collaborating with the new suppliers. I think Bhanushi can talk a little bit about RFP Accelerator. We have built within Everest Group, we have built a tool, RFP Accelerator, which highlights some of the questions that you can incorporate in your existing ID sourcing RFPs to make sure that you go ahead with the right suppliers. You have the right information before making the decision of going ahead with any suppliers. So there's a need of the hour to make sure majority of your spend is with suppliers who are more ESG adherent and act as transformation drivers in ESG and promote co-innovation within procurement teams who are keen to collaborate with you, work with you to take even your sustainability journeys ahead. There's increasingly a need to make sustainable procurement a differentiator in the market, with the rise of conscious consumerism, especially, and the even the employees of your organizations employees globally are more keen to collaborate with organizations that are more sustainability conscious. So once you have these mechanisms in place, we are seeing organizations making sustainability procurement, sustainable business activities a differentiator, a brand builder for themselves in the market, investing actively in tech solutions to track KPIs, measure progress, talk about that progress in the market, and collaborate with reputed ESG rating agencies to track your not just your year on year progress, but even the progress of your suppliers. And finally, when it comes to operation, incorporate a dedicated section in RFPs. I think we have already touched upon this. Use ESG alternatives to increase procurement savings, and incorporate stringent ESG clauses in supplier agreements to ensure compliance with ESG standards. I think, yeah. So before we get into the questions, just to summarize, I think we have already talked about this, but we have identified 5 key levers that where you can incorporate mechanisms to make sure that your supplier ecosystem is more sustainable. It is by identifying the needs that Bhanushi were talking about, setting the right strategy. What is it that your priority is in terms of your sustainability journey? Is it just about compliance? Is it about voluntary reporting? Is it about we want to be sustainable as a business because we want to be a purpose-driven organization? Identify those needs, list down those needs, align those needs when you're going to go to market within your go-to-market strategy, when you're selecting the suppliers, when you're evaluating these proposals. Negotiate and award good performance on ESG matrix for your suppliers. It's about positive reinforcement. How a lot of tech providers, even the large insurance banking firms, are increasingly talking about sustainable supplier awards. They're rewarding the good work that their supplier ecosystem is doing, and that again puts that peer pressure on the supplier ecosystem to focus on these initiatives. And then finally, contract and transition. So it's not just about selection process, it's not just about taking care of sustainability initiative once a year or twice a year. It's an ongoing journey. So how do you incorporate those elements within the contract or within your working relationship with the suppliers, so that ESG does not take a backseat after cost? ESG takes a seat on the table with the cost and risk aspects that procurement teams that are high priority issues for procurement teams. Panushi, do you want to add anything?
No, I think you gave a great summary, right? And I realized I was looking through the question set, and you also ended up answering some of the questions that we had, right? So one of the questions was around the fact that can you provide examples of specific questions included in RFI, RFP to cover sustainability topics? Now, we do have an accelerator, and the good thing is that it is sort of complementary. So what we can do is, as we share this presentation, we'll also share this ESG RFP. You can go to our reports portal, you can download it, and you'll see the list of questions that we have on ESG that you can put in directly, right, within your RFPs as well. But just to give you a hint of what these questions are, these are mostly focused on the aspects that we mentioned throughout, right, on ESG. So talking about the certifications or talking about the carbon emissions or so on and so forth. So you need to pick and choose what you want to take from that, right? So great. I think this has been great. What we can do now is we'll jump to the questions now, and I'll probably just just read out the question and then we can answer it. Arpita, you can also feel free to chime in on whichever question you feel. Yeah.
Banushi, I see there was a couple of questions here related to procure to pay and invoicing. Okay. Some interest because of one of the earlier slides you're putting up. I think people are curious to know, not that you can get into the too much details, there's not too much time, but I mean, how could it actually be that you're deriving sustainability data, maybe some kind of carbon footprint from an invoice? Can you say any words to how that might work?
Definitely. So firstly, when it comes to P2P and getting down that deep into the value chain, we've only seen it in very, very mature organizations that have extremely well integrated data systems, right? So what they have done in those cases is that they have, let's say, an outsourcing partner, or they have these rating providers that they already are aligned with. And what they're doing is that they're just tracking whether the sort of P2P or the spend data that they're getting out of these suppliers is just linked to the data that these rating providers are also giving to them, right? So again, any examples of how invoices can be analyzed? And then how does the P2P work analyzing the info? Okay, so both of these questions are similar in that sense. So what they're doing in that case is that within the P2P value chain, firstly, they're making sure that the invoicing or the spend or the final carbon emissions that are there, they're present in the final records that are there. And then they're linking back to the actual supply base information that we've gotten in the beginning. So it's not that it is happening at the final stages. It is just that the final spend is being linked back to the information that we've gotten in the beginning itself. It's like a validation, more like, just towards the end also we're being sustainable rather than it being more of, a huge action item in itself, that P2P invoicing is the only way we're tracking sustainability. No, it's not like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. There was a question there from Gabriella about what is the difference between including contractual terms and having a supplier code of conduct. Maybe I can just put a few words to that. A supplier code of conduct, I think, is the minimum behavior, business behavior you are expecting and requiring from your supplier base, whereas contractual terms are more specifically terms that you agree and negotiate with your suppliers in return for providing a contract, and could vary depending on a project and so on. I don't know if you want to add something there, Banashi, about the difference between contract terms and supplier code of conduct.
Right. No, actually, I think you framed that really well, right? So supplier code of conduct is more of a checklist item that organizations use, whereas including contractual terms is actually putting the onus on the suppliers, right? Which Arpita also pointed out, that you bring ESG to the table and you make sure these things are there within the actual contract that they're signing. Usually what we've seen is that it's not very, of course, it's not like it's outcome-based ESG, that, your actual revenue is dependent on ESG. But just the fact that it is even mentioned in a soft language within the contract, it puts a lot of onus on suppliers to be able to report it. So the language that we've typically seen within contracts is mostly around that the supplier has provided, let's say, X amount of documentation on sustainability. They plan to have these targets on carbon emissions and so on and so forth. And that is just mentioned softly, that it is there and it is to be met and to be reported every year or every half a year or whatever works for the organization.
Great. And there was a question there, about really ultimately the power sits with the supplier in some cases. And the really good matrix you have at the end. And I've also seen other companies, since obviously there is a limited amount of time and resources in the procurement function, it could be useful sometimes perhaps to prioritize those companies you have more leverage with, right?
That's true. I think this was a great question, actually, that sometimes you don't even have a choice, right? Supplier power is so high that, you have to go with your preferred supplier. You have to go with that particular vendor, especially within outsourced services. We've seen this work. So what we have seen as best practices in that case is a champion challenger model, in which you have your champion, of course, right? Let's say you're working with this large provider, but you also have a backup in place with, let's say, a I wouldn't say tier 2, in the same tier 1 heritage providers, you have another provider that is providing the same type of service. And it may or may not be happening in all cases. If you're a regional specific IT services supplier, you may not find that backup. But in most cases, in the large outsourcing relationships, you are able to find one backup, even if you don't think they're that good. You want to make sure you give some amount of services that are not so critical to that backup supplier as well, so that you have those sort of, you also have a competitive spirit that helps to arise, and it helps with your negotiations that you're doing. When it comes to ESG negotiations, yes, of course, but when it comes to your normal negotiations as well, it just helps to balance out your entire supplier portfolio very well. So it's not that you're switching to an alternative supplier, it's more of you're sort of having them as a challenger to the champion supplier. Yeah.
I think we have time maybe for one more question. I see that here Chiara has asked if product eco-labels or certifications are considered in the evaluation of suppliers.
Eco-label.
The last question there.
Okay. For example, IT hardware suppliers also ranked. We will have to look into this actually. I do know that there are certifications, but I can't remember off the top of my mind what those are called. There
I
are
think Chiara is
some
actually a member of a certification, TCO.
Okay, TCO, right. I do know
Yeah.
about TCO, but I'm not aware about other hardware-specific certification bodies. But I do know that there are some that exist because our clients have been using them.
Okay, great. Well, I think we're out of time, but maybe we can just take a note of those questions and then just get back to you on those, right? By email or however, by joining. If you join our Danish chapter, then we can get back to those questions we didn't have time to answer. So we just have 2 minutes left, so just 1 minute left, in fact. So it just remains for me to thank you so much, Arpita, and thank you so much, Banji, for a fantastic webinar. Super interesting and insightful. Now on the screen is a QR code, so you can quickly get your smartphone out and scan that, and that will enable you to join the Denmark chapter of the Sustainable Procurement Pledge. The link was also in the chat as well, so please join us, and we will be putting up the presentation on our space in spp.earth, which is the homepage of the Sustainable Procurement Pledge. But once again, a very big thank you to Arpita and Banji for such a great webinar for from the Everest Group.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot, Miguel. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.